thank you, Kate, for reminding me that we're recording so that we will post this online. And all of the meeting materials will be shared and posted on the project website soon after tonight's meeting. So again, when we get to questions, you're welcome to use the raise hand feature, which if you go down to the reactions, which is kind of a smiley face on the icon bar, there's a, oh, that's not, yes, there's a raise hand feature. I'm sorry that I didn't include those slides, but hopefully we've been on Zoom enough. But you're always welcome to, when we get to questions, take yourself off mute. And you know, if you have any trouble using any of those features, just let us know. So I'm going to hand it over to Melissa Dumont from our project team to walk us through the next part of the presentation.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sandra. So the last time we met, we talked about goals and objectives. This isn't the first time you're seeing this. It is where we started. We looked at other countywide plans. We certainly looked at the BRT analysis for MD 355 as well. And we applied it to our corridor and modified a little bit. And this is what you saw last time. And so these are still the goals and objectives that stand right now. And you're going to see shortly, Lucas is going to walk us through how these become sort of building blocks for the evaluation, including the termini screening that we're going to roll out today. So let's dive right into what is the existing conditions that I wanted to talk about. We will have the draft corridor foundations report ready for you guys to take a look at here, posted to the website here soon. So you can look through it in more detail. I'm going to cover it pretty high level because we talked about it last time we met as well, and reserve the majority of the time for the termini screening analysis that Lucas is going to walk us through. So we collected existing conditions in the study area. Go back one, there you go, to establish basically those current characteristics and the conditions. And we looked at related studies and projects. We looked at demographics, multimodal connectivity. We looked at the street network, activity density in terms of activity centers in the area. We looked at land use and development, transit service that's already available. And these are all pieces and parts of the existing study area that we wanted to make sure we understood what the baseline was. We also conducted a survey, and 496 total responses to our survey, which was great. Thanks to all of you if you had a chance to fill it out and to advocate for it. We've got kind of a snapshot here of a couple of details that are kind of interesting to look through. So shopping and recreation and entertainment are basically some of the primary reasons people are coming in and out of North Bethesda. If you look at some of these graphics, in terms of frequented locations, we had a lot of people who indicated the mall and Pike and Rose were pretty frequent locations. And then we had sort of an other category in terms of destinations, and people noted nearby parks, shopping centers, even specifics of doctors' offices and grocery stores and schools in the area that they commute to and use. And in terms of whether they're going to White Flint or Grosvenor Metro Rail stations, they were somewhat equally distributed in terms of where people were landing. 39% of the people who took the survey indicated that they are working or learning remotely. So that's a good tidbit of information for us to have. And we also did bus stop chats. So we did a total of 142 bus stop chats were completed, and those were sort of surveys with bus riders. The majority of bus stop chat respondents were using the bus as the primary mode for their travel in and around North Bethesda. And the peak hours were morning and afternoon, really were the kind of peak times that people were coming. Unlike the survey respondents, most of those bus stop chat respondents were traveling in the area for work. So they were moving around the area specifically for work. And then in terms of most important attribute of the service, folks really noted that it needs to run on time to get you to work on time. That was really important. I'm going to go through a couple of sort of overarching key opportunities that we identified as a result of the corridor foundations. Again, that existing conditions set of work that we did. The study area for this project, it is a smaller area in terms of BRT corridors that are being evaluated right now. It is less diverse compared to the rest of Montgomery County. People are primarily, if they work in the study area, they're commuting from other locations, so Washington, D.C. or Silver Spring, or other locations within the county. Transit is operating on both corridors, but has limited frequency, and there isn't any weekend service along the Tuckerman alignment, so there's an opportunity there. And there is a lot of development. So 9.6 million gross floor area of residential, commercial, and office space is coming to the study area, in addition to almost 15,000 office and retail jobs. And some of this development also offers some right-of-way in and around it that could be used by the improved BRT corridor. So the plans that are in place right now did assume a very robust transportation system, dedicated, with dedicated bus lanes and fully built out bike and ped as part of this development opportunity in the area. So additional opportunities here. There is an opportunity to connect to the regional network. Obviously, that's this corridor here between 270 and the Metro Rail alignment 495 obviously becomes a very important regional connector. We do have we've got opportunities for safety improvements, obviously, and any opportunity to make improvements on these corridors, you can weave in achieving Vision Zero goals as well. So that's obviously something we're trying to achieve. We're looking to maximize multimodal connectivity, and we're always looking at those post-COVID travel patterns, which are kind of up and down. Generally, for vehicles, people are moving around a lot, and traffic is up, but they're moving around at different parts of the day. And so our usual peak hours have gotten kind of wonky with COVID. And transit is not back up to where it was, although bus is doing better than rail. So some of those basic trends that we've identified, we'll continue to monitor what's happening there. And I'm going to just pause it really quick here to see if you have any questions on the corridor foundations. Again, we started this conversation at the last meeting and showed you some of the existing conditions. And our next step is talking about the termini screening. But before I turn it over to Lucas, anybody have any questions or comments?
Melissa, there were a couple of questions in the chat, and then I see that there's a hand up, so I can kind of facilitate that, and then we'll see if we can respond to most of these. So there was a comment just about the status of this project. So this project was approved by council. It's codified in the county's master plan, and so this is the next phase of that study to look at the feasibility and kind of working out some of those details. And it's always up to council how they decide to advance a particular project at each phase. So the next question was, did this initiative consider transit between North Bethesda and the eastern part of the county, and transit between Bethesda along Old Georgetown Road? So I'm understanding that, did we look at coming from Bethesda off of Old Georgetown Road instead of up 355? If I understand, and Karen, if I'm not asking that properly, feel free to take yourself off mute and ask that question more clearly. Did I get that right?
Right. So there's no direct route between White Flint or Grosvenor Station to Bethesda along Old Georgetown. So you can't get to, say, Suburban Hospital without transferring either at the Montgomery Mall or at the Bethesda Metro Station. So yeah, it seems like there is no direct route there, and there isn't a, well, never mind.
No, and we've actually had some of that conversation. You're right, and I actually, if there's somebody here who was involved in the 2013 plan, they may be able to speak to why some of those decisions were made. But our task with this project is to advance the recommendation from the 2013 study. And I think you're right that there's definitely demand and activity centers along Old Georgetown. I think that I would recommend and suggest that those of you that are not aware, the county is doing a pretty extensive ride-on reimagine, taking a look at the entire ride-on network. And so we'll be looking at all of the existing routes and where the connections are, and if we're adequately surveying the demand and the travel patterns that are out there today. So I think, you know, I'll definitely share that information if folks are not aware of that, but you know, I can't speak to why that wasn't included in the 2013 master plan, but there's other opportunities to look at making sure that there's good transit connections, particularly to those activity centers that you described. So I may not be as satisfying an answer, but I can certainly share some of that information moving forward.
Thanks, Sandra. And I don't mean to be, well, I'll just say that there seems to be, well, never mind. You have to transfer between Metro and a, you know, Metro bus, or between Metro and Ride-On to make that loop. So it just seems to me we already have Ride-On routes that go from White Flint and from Grosvenor to Montgomery Mall.
Yeah, no, you're correct. And I think you know, if we think about it, all of the corridors that we're studying have existing transit routes and service. The question is, where can we improve and make it more attractive and make it competitive with riding in a car or making a different choice along some of these corridors? So if you think about, we make roadway improvements, like we have roads, but there are often times where we make improvements so that we can make things more efficient. And if we think about a similar type of approach for transit, there are some corridors that we want to take a look at and see, can we make transit better, more efficient, faster, competitive along some of these corridors? And that's what we're doing here. And there's arguments to be made that there's lots of different places that we might want to think about taking some of those, taking that approach. So I'm not keeping track of the order, but on my screen, I've got Silvana. So we'll go to Silvana, then we'll go to Joshua. So did you want to come off mute, Silvana?
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Thank you, Sandra. So I just wanted to go back to the slide with you guys said you were polling riders on, like, having little chats with riders. I was wondering what the number of riders and over what period of time did you guys poll these people? Like, how many riders did you talk to? Looking at this slide, it looked like it was like, I don't know if there's some sort of a metric in there instead of a number. So like 45 at the top.
For the bus stop chats, it was a total of 142 bus stop chats, and we did that over the course of, was that 2 weeks, Kate, or 3 weeks?
It was just about 3 weeks because we had a couple rain delays. We did not go out during when there were storms happening, and that was completed at the end of April. So it was about the second week of April to the end of April that was occurring.
And was that during just peak ridership hours or just pretty slow times?
Yes, and we actually have the locations and the times that we were out there. We have that in a schedule, so we can send that to Sandra and she could provide that to you all if you're interested in seeing the very specific details of which stops we were at what times. But we did try to go during peak ridership to make sure we were capturing as many people as possible.
But it was a mix of some of those, it was different days of the week, and it was both morning and evening. So yeah, at the different locations.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Joshua?
Thank you. Just one sort of quick question, if you could advance to the map. Would we assume that any additional transit access on 495 or 270 would probably have an interface with the bus exchange at Montgomery Mall?
Great question. Lucas, do you want to talk about how we approach that?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, were plans that were looked at, from transit service, both on the corridor forward plan and as well as the 495 American Legion Bridge study, which was a joint effort between Virginia and Maryland. And yes, a lot of those transit services had either a stopping point or an origin point at the mall location. There's also a planned access point to the proposed express lanes that's planned for that location too. So yes, that would be kind of the planned interface to whatever routes come out, materialize from those studies.
Thank you.
And I think that gets that Timur had a question in there as well.
Yep.
Just referring to the development potential and viability of both White Flint and Westfield Montgomery Mall. And I do think, as Lucas was saying, as part of those studies, the 495 transit TDM study, as well as the 270 forward, the Westfield Montgomery Mall is a transit hub and is being planned as a transit hub. And White Flint, Lucas will get into it a little bit more, but the development planned at White Flint is also pretty extensive there.
There was just a question about the slides. I meant to send them before we started. I know I like to follow along in case you want to zoom in. So I will send those shortly, and they will also be posted on the website for folks that want to look at them later, or folks who aren't able to join us tonight. So I will send that out now so you can have that as well. Did we miss any big questions? There were some questions about ridership, which I think we'll look at in more detail. I think we touched all the questions, and again, as we go, there'll be other opportunities to weigh in. So we'll move forward with the presentation, and we'll come back to questions.
All right, great. Good evening, everybody. I'm going to walk through some of the preliminary analysis from our Termini screening. So, as Sandra mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, the master plan alignment had identified two potential paths that this transit way could take. And so the way that we're kind of approaching this effort is to first identify which of those endpoints would be most advantageous for this transit way. And then once we do that, the build alternatives phase that Sandra mentioned earlier, that will be able to get into a lot more detail in the alignment when looking at more details. But really, this is a screening to understand some of the factors that go into kind of picking the endpoint for the planned terminus. I'm going to go over just kind of a couple components of each of the alternatives that we're looking at, and then we'll go through some of the metrics that were developed to evaluate them. And it's important to note that when we're talking about this, we're not just talking about the terminus or the endpoint itself, but the alignment that goes along with it as well. So on your screen is the White Flint alternative. You'll see both alternatives have the same configuration on the western side, and then that split at Old Georgetown and Tuckerman Lane. So the White Flint alternative would continue up Old Georgetown through the Pike and Rose area and to the White Flint Metro Rail station. You'll also see on these slides what the master plans assumed for in terms of pedestrian and bicycle facilities, so that we're taking that into account as we get into more detailed planning and conceptual layout. The Grosvenor alignment here takes a right turn on Tuckerman and then goes and terminates at the Grosvenor Metro Rail station here. Again, both of these alignments, as was stated in the master plan, assumed primarily dedicated lanes for transit, meaning the bus would have its own lane. That will be something that we'll look at in more detail in that next build alternatives phase. But for this component, we're sticking to what had been assumed in the 2013 plan here. So in order to develop a justifiable screening process for the two alternatives, we developed a set of metrics that were rooted in the 6 goal areas that Melissa talked about later, and their accompanying objective statements. This is meant to be a screening, not an exhaustive list of everything that can be measured. Throughout, you'll see some metrics that relate both to existing data, what's out there today, and then some metrics that are based on plans and forecasted growth or changes in the study area. And we wanted to intentionally consider both what is out there today, what are the current conditions that we're seeing, but then also making sure that we're identifying future-proof solutions and ideas that will fit with the county's plans. And so we'll go through the items considered a little bit more detail, and we can and certainly we'll touch on some of the things that we'll be looking at in more detail in the build alternatives phase. But just to kind of give you a quick sense of some of the things that we looked at as part of this terminized screening, you can see here some of the metrics that we looked at for each of the 6 goal areas. I'm not going to go through each one of these, but ultimately the details for this will be identified in a terminized screening report that we're currently working on. And then we're going to hit some of the highlights from that analysis in the next few slides here. So we wanted to hit it up front with kind of some of the key takeaways. So this chart here is kind of summarizing how each of the alternatives compared to each other according to the 6 goal areas. Overall, White Flint came out ahead in almost all of the 6 goal areas. The most noticeable advantage being in the mobility choices, which is about focusing on connecting to improving access to jobs and community facilities and multimodal choices, as well as the economic growth of fostering the development that's planned in that northern area. The one area that Grosvenor did have the advantage on is in sustainable solutions goal area, which actually includes not only environmental sustainability, but financial sustainability, looking at what cost-effective designs. So we did at this stage a high-level qualitative cost screening, and based on the assumptions that were in the master plan, the Grosvenor alternative did come out as a lower level of cost, but that again is going to be something that we be looking at those different cost considerations as we go further. So now we're going to go kind of one by these goal areas and go through a little bit more detail. And as we go through, please kind of take notes of things that may seem a little counterintuitive to you, or you have additional things you want to share, or you'd like some clarification on as we go through. All right, so we'll start with quality service goal area. And the objective for this one was to provide a fast, reliable, efficient, and connected transit service. And so the map you see on the screen here shows some of the regional connections that are available from the various terminal points here. We mentioned some of the potential connections via transit and the interstate via 495 and 270 on the western side. Excuse me. And then on the eastern side, the White Flint having connections both north to Rockville, east to other parts of the county as well, and then of course south to DC and Bethesda in both of the eastern termini screening. We also conducted a regional trip analysis. So Melissa mentioned that a lot of the people that work in the study area were coming in from other areas, and actually able to use a big data source called Replica, which uses anonymized tracking cell phone travel information, and able to look at the patterns in these different analysis areas, and saw that about 45% more trips were coming into the area around the White Flint path, the alignment there. One of the pieces that we did look at was existing Metro Rail ridership. On the Grosvenor side, pre-pandemic, there were a significantly more amount of Metro Rail riders at Grosvenor. Our kind of hypothesis was that this is likely due to both the larger parking garage there and also that this may have aligned with the portions when Metro is running the turnaround service at Grosvenor and not all of the trains fully to Shady Grove. One other piece that's on here I didn't mention was the existing bus riders. There was some discussion earlier about what existing transit service is out there. Along the White Flint route, there's about 450 more existing bus riders per weekday currently out there. Moving on to the mobility choices goal area. The objective here was to improve access to jobs, activity centers, and community facilities. So you see some of the community facilities here that are going on in the study. There's a lot of popular destinations beyond just traditional work destinations that we want to capture in our analysis here. When we look at the existing number of jobs, it's almost double on the White Flint portion of the alignment, and then community facilities, an advantage for White Flint as well. We did look at existing pedestrian and bicycle level of comfort. That was a separate effort that has been done through the county to basically identify how comfortable it is to either bike or walk on these areas. We did find that the analysis is lower along Old Georgetown Road, largely due to the width and the travel speed along that corridor. On the sustainable solutions goal area, this is the one that I mentioned that includes both environmental sustainability as well as cost. So here are some of the items that we did look at for our qualitative cost comparison at this stage in the process. So there are a lot of things that go into what we call the capital or the infrastructure costs for a project like this: number of stations, how many signals or intersections you're modifying, the facilities outside the roadway, stations, things like that, that contribute to that capital cost. So again, based on what was assumed in the master plan, there is likely a lower level of infrastructure investment needed on the Grosvenor alternative. The operating cost, which is basically the cost to run the bus service itself, is approximately the same for each of them due to the similar alignment length. It's basically the same distance start to finish on each of the alignments. For the community equity goal area, we looked at access to a bunch of different population groups, including but not limited to what went into the county's equity focus areas, which are the areas that are shaded in red on this map. The White Flint alignment had a higher number of low-income populations, minority populations, and low-paying jobs, as well as some broader connections to those equity focus areas in the northeast section of this map as well. You also see the blue dotted lines on here. These are the other county planned BRT systems or BRT services that could connect to other areas as well. Okay. For the economic growth goal area, this is the map that you see here are some of the pipeline developments that are in the works in the county. You can see there's a lot of things, as you probably are well aware of, going around the Pike and Rose area up by the White Flint Metro Rail. There's a future planned street network on the east side of Rockville Pike as well by the White Flint Metro Rail. And so 9.3 million square feet of planned development, about double that of Grosvenor alignment, as well as a 31% increase in activity density. So that means that the concentration of people and jobs per acre is expected to grow 30% between 2020 and 2030 along the White Flint alignment, as compared to about 2% along the Grosvenor Metro Rail. Yeah, sorry, not Metro, the Grosvenor alignment. One component we did look at was the existing land use that's along the corridor. There is a fair amount of single family housing along the Old Georgetown Road, especially the west side. And so the Grosvenor alignment does have, from an existing land use perspective, does have higher overall residential density and mixed use in terms of what's there right now. All right, we got one more goal area to cover, and then we can take a look at the conclusions and talk about any questions that might have. For the safety goal, we primarily focused on the crashes, both overall vehicle crashes and then crashes involving vulnerable road users, pedestrians and bicyclists. The White Flint alignment did have overall more vehicular crashes along the route. There have been a couple of unfortunate fatalities along both alignments here, including additional one recently along Tuckerman Lane that we certainly want to acknowledge and look at. So that covers kind of the six goal areas. This is the same kind of summary slide to show how that compares. And so we're kind of curious to hear your thoughts and questions. What stands out to you? What's your reaction to some of the White Flint coming out ahead in the goal areas? Open to take questions here.
There were some hands up and then some questions. Lucas, do you want to start with live people or?
Sure. If you want to, I can't see as much, so if you want.
Oh, okay, sure. So
Jerry,
Jerry, I think you had your hand up. Did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I'm on the MD 355 corridor route. If you want to connect with that, you have to go to Grosvenor because there is no connection at White Flint Metro for the 355 bus. So maybe you don't want these buses connecting, but if you do want them connecting, the only logical place would be at Grosvenor where there's actually a stop. The stop near White Flint is a security lane, which is a good 3 blocks away, probably about 2/10 of a mile away from where the bus is going to stop. So do you want these interconnected, or is it the intent to have these as so totally separate things? And the other point I don't quite understand, we're getting less than 2 or less than 3 riders per day per trip using the number 6 bus that goes to Grosvenor or the number 96 bus that goes to Grosvenor. There doesn't seem to be any demand from White Flint to get to Grosvenor or to White Flint. I mean, if anyone wants a train, they would take the thing, but we're getting like less than 3 riders per trip. This seems basically, instead of putting BRT, you could have free Lyft or Uber service between Montgomery Mall and the Grosvenor station.
Lucas, did you want to?
Yeah, let me. I'll answer the first question. So, we certainly want the BRT systems to connect. We are working closely with the MD 355 team. That the currently planned station is looking at approximately around the Old Georgetown Road intersection here and White Flint. And so we're looking at ways to potentially connect with that service at that location. This is just, at this point, it's a general path to show that it would be connecting to the White Flint station.
But not to the BRT.
And the BRT.
And the BRT, yeah.
Well, the BRT is like a good probably good at least 1,000 feet away. I haven't measured the actual number of feet between the BRT station and security lane. But these two are not sort of being worked together for some unknown reason.
They are. We actually met very recently with the 355 design team, and the goal is to coordinate and look at making that a seamless transfer. So the goal and the plans are showing that those would be coordinated. So the goal is to make sure that there is a connection. That's underway, and that's happening now. So and did you want to respond to the ridership question, Lucas? Do you have any information to share at this point? Or is that in the document that people will have access to about the ridership?
Yeah, I want to make sure I understood the question. I think, there will certainly be able to show maps about where the existing ridership and numbers are along each of these lines. And we will be doing ridership forecasting at later points in the study when we get to the build alternatives phase.
But the ridership data was published by the Montgomery County Council, and it's showing less than 3 riders per trip on either the number 6 or the number 96 bus that goes from Montgomery Mall to the Grosvenor Station. This is basically almost no ridership. And this is when it's free. Could you imagine once we start charging $1 or $2 of how few of the riders will be?
Yeah. So, go ahead.
I mean, yes, I think that's certainly a noted, and we don't necessarily want to put transit service, especially BRT, where there's not going to be demand. So that will certainly be looked at as a factor when we move forward.
Thank you.
Silvana, I'm not sure if your hand is up or it's a holdover from previously. Okay, well, we'll move to Catsoid iPhone. I'm sorry, I don't know who that actually is.
Hi, my name is, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, hi. I'm trying to do this on my phone. I missed the first part of the meeting. What are we evaluating here? Are we looking at a new BRT line, a bus line connecting to the 355 BRT? Just a little bit of context on what the last half an hour's discussion's been.
So, and if you're on a phone, I don't know if you can see any of the slides that we're looking at, but
Yeah, I saw.
Oh, okay. So briefly, this is a planning study taking the recommendation from the 2013 master plan that identified a network of bus rapid transit lines throughout the county, and looking at doing a facility planning process to advance the project to the next phase. So one of the first questions for this particular corridor is, should it terminate at White Flint or Grosvenor? And that's
so the mode is BRT. It's not just a bus feeder or anything or something.
Correct. It's a higher capacity transit. Now that can look a lot of different ways, and that's going to be what we study in the next phase of this analysis.
Okay, so I would offer a basic spatial suggestion here, and pardon the noise in the background. It's all those cars out there. If this thing is a feeder to either the Red Line or the 355 and BRT, and most of those people feeding are heading south into the district, then Grosvenor has the singular advantage that you're not backtracking. If people are trying to feed into the Red Line from the Montgomery Mall, the whole direction of the trip feels like you're moving away from your destination. So you can do all the great evaluations in the world of equity and 30 other goals and parameters, but just look at the direction that the route is going in, and that's going to tell you, if people are heading to the city, they're not going to want to backtrack. And that's probably, to me, the most important criteria in selecting an alignment. These places will develop over time. I mean, right now, White Flint is ahead in terms of number of units. It's further along in its development pipeline, but Grosvenor will get there at some point in the future. But let's think about the overall network design. Is that a thought that staff has had or consultants have had?
Yeah, I can answer that. So that certainly is one of the trip patterns that we're seeing in terms of people going towards DC, but there are also lots of other destinations and origin points that we're seeing coming in and out of this.
What's the split between people going inbound versus outbound right now? I mean, I'm used to seeing rush hour traffic basically taking people into the district.
I don't have those numbers right now. We can look at to see what's in the, what's documented in the full report. But what we were definitely seeing connections, to other parts of Montgomery County from the north. I think this is meant to be partially, yes, that feeder to the red line, but there's certainly other travel patterns that are being addressed by this service.
As an urbanist, one of my priorities is not to advance sprawl, not to be pushing people to the periphery, but to reinforce the regional center. And the regional center happens to be in the District of Columbia.
Katzoid, may I chime in? This is Karen. So I don't think that's the problem they are trying to solve. I think they're just trying to create like a little bit better transit between either Grosvenor or the White Flint Metro Station to Montgomery Mall. So they're not trying to look at the overall transit situation in Montgomery County, which is what I think the other folks are doing. It just doesn't seem to me that there are already buses between. Never mind.
I'm questioning the priorities that are driving these decisions.
So I'll just share a couple of other things. I think you raised, a really valid point that we've talked about is where are people trying to get to and from, and what is the path of least resistance, and what problem are we trying to solve? I think we talked a little bit about that at our first meeting. But what I'll say is that in addition to there's transit service on both, and that will remain regardless of what happens with this project. There's demand, and there's bus service that serves both Tuckerman and Old Georgetown and can get people to both White Flint and Grosvenor, and I don't see a situation where that would change. And so that's point A. The question is, with the redevelopment of Rock Spring Park, where there's going to be, which a traditional office park right now, and will redevelop to a higher mixed use density, there's going to be a lot more jobs and activity happening at White Flint, considerably more than what's happening at Grosvenor. And there are these potential connections from the I-270 corridor. Where is that demand and desire and and pattern that we're looking at? You're right. If I'm going south and there's a good transit option, I can take Tuckerman and I'll go to Grosvenor and I'll do what I've been doing today. The question is, for this as an activity center, right? Looking at what's happening and what's going to be coming online at White Flint and connections to the other advantage of White Flint is that it will also connect to the Randolph Road BRT, which we have folks that live out further east in the county that work in the employment center. So there are a lot of different factors going on here. I don't disagree with your starting point about where the demand is and trying to create a more urban environment. I just think there are a lot of different factors that we're looking at and that we're trying to solve with this particular project.
All right, thank you. I will stop talking now, but I will just say, I don't see the need for a new bus route between Grosvenor or White Flint to Montgomery Mall. However, you have more information about the planned development near Montgomery Mall and elsewhere, and maybe that's where you should. Well, never mind. I should shut up.
Okay, let's. This is great conversation, really helpful, and I think it also helps others to dig in and unpack some of the complexities of what we're trying to look at with this study. So I just want to make sure that we hit on some of the questions that came in the chat. Okay, so sorry.
Actually, I think it would be good to go back through a couple of these.
Okay, do you want to hit it because you were looking at them more closely? Yep.
Yeah, let me start with some of these. So there was a question here about what problem were we trying to solve and where did we start? And I feel like that is the goals and objectives here, the initial goals and objectives. So this was built on the 2013 countywide master plan for the corridors. And Lucas, if you go back up to goals and objectives slide. I know it's hard to read this stuff at the last second, and the PowerPoint will be made available to you after the meeting. We talked about these last time as well. But just a quick look at these goals and objectives. Just zipping through these questions really quick. We talked about existing service and extent of service already provided and riders. And we do have an analysis in the Corridor Foundation's report that will also be made available to you that talks about that existing service and when it's offered. And
but do any of these address the audience you're trying to capture? I don't know who you're going after, shoppers, workers, commuters.
Riders, right, who the riders are. So believe it's all of the above, Timur, to get everyone we can to ride it with a better sort of faster bus rapid transit system that connects to those regional connectors, the 270 connection with Westfield Montgomery Mall as a transit center, and then obviously the metro line, but also thinking about development in and around the area. That was another factor. Lucas, we may want to sit back on one of the development slides for a minute and talk about, it's kind of a driving factor in our discussions, at least internally, all of the development that's occurring around White Flint and around the mall area in the pink there, the Rock Springs sector plan, and what's happening around Grosvenor Strathmore. So just looking at those main activity centers and what the future brings for those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one theme that's kind of being hit on by a lot of these questions is that balance between like what's out there today and do we need a BRT like right now versus what's in the future. I think we need that balance, to make sure we're factoring in both today and into the future. I think in years from now, this area may have significantly more people and jobs living in it and coming to it, and also different travel patterns. And so we don't want to just stick to existing ridership or existing land use patterns in our analyses here.
Melissa, as you're going through those, I'm Josh. I don't know if you're Josh or Joshua, but is your hand a holdover, or do you have something you want to share? Okay, so do you want to go ahead and unmute?
Sure. Jerry, it's good to see you again. I'm glad you're well, first of all. I had two comments, I guess, a little bit on your methodology here. One on the bike level of comfort. You really need to include the Bethesda trolley trail, which is much more comfortable and safe and actually convenient to a lot of places in your network here, and the and your half mile radii are they need to be tightened up a bit because you have them going across the MARC rail lines and things like that are really not feasible to human.
Thanks, Joshua. Yeah, both very valid comments. I think from the trail perspective, for this analysis of the different alternatives, we were focusing basically just on what's along, in terms of the level of comfort, what's actually along the specific roadways. One of the other metrics, which I don't think we highlighted in the presentation, is the number of connections to trails and other bikeways, so that the trail is getting factored into the analysis there. From the buffer perspective, understand that there are certainly some limitations to that buffer area. We will, in our build alternatives phase, we're planning to do a little bit more of a walk shed analysis, where you can, to find out the distance you can actually walk from the stations rather than just a circle around it. So more to come, I think, as we get into the more the detailed phases of the build alternatives.
And more good questions here in the chat. Andrew asked a question about the stations along each one of these routes.
Yeah, great question. So the stations that are shown here on both alignments are strictly the stations that were identified in the 2013 master plan. That would, again, be another thing that we would look at during the build alternatives phase. There may be either additional stations, there may be moved stations, and that's certainly something that we would factor into the development of the build alternatives. If there are specific locations that you would be interested in looking at for a station, certainly feel free to share those, and that we can, we can certainly look at that as a potential if there were specific locations that you had in mind.
And then I'll just keep us moving, but feel free to drop those locations in the chat or take yourself off mute here. But there's another good question here, Sandra, about the interplay between the Ride-On Reimagined work and these BRT corridors. I don't know whether you or Corey want to kind of speak to that. Was one of the questions Karen asked.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we're working very closely. I can't see right now if they're here, but they attend many of our meetings, and we are part of the steering committee for the Ride-On Reimagine, and there's an obvious connection, and we need to make sure that we are coordinating to make sure that we're aware and being thoughtful and mindful as we advance both of these projects at the same time. So we're working very closely with them. But great question, and I hope that folks from these projects will also be engaged in that study as well. Melissa, on the question about the Woodward High School, I don't actually know the answer, so we can certainly find out. So yeah, I think understanding where people will be coming from is going to be important. I think that's a good point. Oh, but somebody else has an answer, so there you go.
There you go. And Jerry asked a question, which is a good one. I think that we're in the process of evaluating too. It's sort of like, are you picking up riders through the more residential areas? This has to do with the number of stops, which I think we're taking a look at as well. Are you picking up enough riders along the way? Where are you picking them up from, whether it's residential or more commercial or higher density residential? And these are all good questions that are going to go into the evaluation of alternatives.
One thing that I think is important to share that we may have mentioned at our last meeting, but it's worth mentioning again. When we looked at the transit data, which again will be in the Carter Foundation study, and we will send you an email with the link once it is up on our website. We intentionally looked at data from the fall of 2019 before the pandemic, so that we can understand a better picture of an existing condition, acknowledging that we're in an interesting time where transit ridership is picking up, but we're not back where we were before the pandemic. So, and some of the anecdotes and some of the data that we see today is perhaps lower ridership than we hope to see on this corridor. So when you look at those numbers, it's in the study, but know that that's data that we took from pre-pandemic, just to understand and acknowledge that that was a truer picture of kind of where transit was before we entered the pandemic. So that's another thing just to consider as when you look at that data. I think we got all of the questions mostly. Is that true?
Primarily, Karen had another good comment here toward the end about activity centers. In ability to get to suburban hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Also,
yeah, and I made that note to make sure that we're sharing that with our Ride-On team. So so they're considering that as part of their study as well. And I see that Silvana's got her hand raised, and then we can pick back up. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm wondering what parameters are we using to understand whether either of the routes or both of them, how do we know that they can tolerate a lane that is dedicated for just this transit?
Great question.
Great question. And we'll definitely be looking at that more in the build alternatives phase. We'll look at some options. For example, if there is currently a 4-lane street, we might look at one option that is 1 lane for cars and 1 lane for transit. We may look at some options if it's consistent with the master plan of adding an additional lane for transit. So we will be doing some more traffic modeling in the next phase of the alternatives, where we get more into detail of the lane configuration assumptions.
And the last comment that I see is, we will also be looking at if there is demand for. We're going to be looking at demand. Is there the demand to invest in a large capital project to this degree? That's going to be a big question that we want to answer at the end of the study. And then we'll also be looking at, are there other ways to accomplish some of these goals with a less intensive physical investment? So those of you that are engaged in the 355 project know that there's different cross sections as you go through the corridor. The whole corridor is not a 2-lane dedicated busway for multiple reasons, including right-of-way, demand, all sorts of other considerations. They have some sections with a reversible bus lane that would operate certain times of the day, and other sections that are in mixed traffic. And so when we get to the next phase where we develop those alternatives for further study, we'll be looking at all of those considerations, and lots of the things that were brought up today will be considered and analyzed. And these are, we're not saying we just don't know yet, right? We have to look at what the data tells us. The first question that we wanted to answer, so that we're not studying 2 alignments, is where do we want to get to, and what is that? Where is the analysis telling us makes more sense given the goals and objectives that we've outlined for this project? And that's what we presented to you earlier. And I think that there's been a lot of good feedback and questions to help sharpen some of the messaging and some of the approach to that we're going to then bring to the public. So our next phase for this project, and I don't want to steal the thunder, but is really taking this more broadly out to the community. And before we go out to the broader community, the way that I think there was a question earlier about kind of the role of the CAC, we really see you all as a sounding board. So if we're getting a lot of the same questions and we're not presenting our message, it allows us to tailor and to respond to some of the things that we're bringing, and make sure that we're being clear and addressing all of the concerns and issues that come up. So this is a really helpful sounding board for us as we take all of these comments and build and advance the project. So having said that, our next big effort, we haven't really gone broadly out to the public. We've been working kind of in smaller groups. We've met with some of the business community, and we've worked with been in touch and contacted some of our the HOAs and some of the residential and commercial uses out here. But this is kind of our first big public engagement, where we really hope that folks who have not been paying attention, I know that this group is particularly engaged, and you read your county emails, and you pay attention to the calendar, and you are much more aware of what's happening. But there's lots of people who will be impacted, whether it's regular bus riders or folks who live along the corridor who may not have even heard of this project yet. So we wanted to share what the next phase is in terms of public engagement. We've already done a lot of public engagement, as you heard, with the survey, which I understand close to 500 responses is one of our most successful surveys that we've done in recent times. So shout out to North Bethesda community. And we've done kind of a first round of these bus stop chats, and our next phase in June is we're going to be going out and having a series of 3 open house opportunities for the broader community. So this is where we do a direct mailing to everybody in a quarter mile of the corridor, and we're doing a really big social media push. What I would ask, I think at our first meeting, I encouraged you all to help amplify some of the communication. We have, lots of ability to reach people, but you all have access to, your school PTA listservs, your HOA, your community, your church and synagogue groups, whatever it is that have listservs or announcement opportunities that we may either not know about or not have access to. So we hope that we'll be following up with kind of a little blurb that if you're able to post on whatever Facebook groups you're in that are kind of community based or locally based, to help let people know about the 3 upcoming public meetings, which are listed on the bottom of this slide here, but you'll be hopefully seeing all over the place in the coming weeks. One of the things that we've been internally talking about is, as we kind of emerge, I know we're still meeting online, are people interested in coming to a community center for a public meeting, or are they happy to stay at home and do these on Zoom? And so we're doing a combination of in-person and online, and we're also doing for 355 as well as New Hampshire. There's a lot of public engagement on BRT happening in June, with multiple opportunities to engage virtually or online as well as in person. So keep an eye out for those announcements. And again, we'll send you a short blurb, and those of you that are willing to share that with your networks, that would be really helpful to get the word out a little bit more broadly. Melissa, I'm sorry I stole the slide from you, but did you want to add anything?
We do have a couple more questions
Okay.
and comments in the chat, and then Sandra asked a question about timing and availability for online versus in person, if you all have a preference there. So please feel free to. So there's a question here about the location of the 3 public meetings.
So 2 of them will be online, so they will be right here in a similar Zoom room to this, and the in-person one will be at the Davis Library. And again, you'll be getting, I promise you, you'll want to stop hearing from us. We're going to send out the email. You'll be getting a postcard in the mail, and there'll be lots of online communication about that. So just marked out, and they're all in the evening. So we tried to do different days of the week. We did not do a weekend, but again, we're going to be seeing how these go and see what people are willing to, prefer, how they prefer to engage with us. So,
Sandra, I will just note that we are going to be at the Montgomery Mall next Saturday, June 4th.
Yep.
That's really to capture people who are there, to let them know about these engagement events. But if you wanted to go out there and just kind of talk about the project, we will be out there from noon to 4 that day.
Great.
And then just a few more comments in the chat here. I think there's some real good dialogue going on. Joshua brought up the question, Lucas, if you go back to the map that shows sort of the, go back a little bit, back, keep going, that one. Okay, so Joshua's bringing up the point, where are you going from, either Grosvenor or White Flint, which I think is a really great point there. So saying White Flint presents a better option for future continuation along Old Georgetown to Bethesda. And it's come up a few times in the chat, and we're taking it very seriously, the specificity of the design at White Flint and the connection of all of these transit services. And if it isn't clear right now, we are working with the design team to make sure that those connections are as close as they possibly can be at that location. And we're trying to redesign and make sure all of that is as easy as possible for pedestrians and cyclists as well. And just a question here also about development and location of development, which I think we talked about. Yeah, so extent of development anticipated at Westfield Montgomery Mall. And I think just to answer that question a little bit, Westfield Montgomery Mall is a pretty active mall itself, and there's development planned in terms of the transit. It's a major transit center, and we've got connectivity with Corridor Forward, the 270 plans, and it was a major point of the terminus for the I-495 transit TDM study for folks coming from Virginia and Maryland. So, but also in addition to that is the Rock Spring sector plan area, which has a bunch of redevelopment going on as well. So it's not just Westfield, Montgomery, but that general vicinity right there as well. And let's see if there's anything else. And I'm not sure about the redevelopment of the Sears site. I have to go back into that sector plan to see what that looks
I'm
like.
not going to call them out, but there may be plenty folks on the call. And if you do know if you have any responses to these, feel free to chime in. I'm not aware of the status of Sears. And then I don't know if these, again, same question, are these holdover hands or new hands? And feel free to unmute yourself if you've got a question. Silvana, and did you have another question?
No, sorry, I just keep
Okay,
leaving
no
my hand up.
No problem. And then I see Jerry, you have your hand up, so I don't know again if that was from before or
New, it's new.
Lou. Okay, great. Go ahead.
You are aware that with the HOV on I-270, Westlake is the major exit in the area. Therefore, Westlake Terrace and Rock Spring Roads and Georgetown will be unbelievably congested. If you want to put BRT on there, they'll basically be stuck in traffic most of the time once the HOV lanes open. This is a very bad choice for putting a bus on a new major route where it's the next entrance further north is all the way at Wooten Parkway, and the other entrances are down all the way by River Road. So these intersections are going to be unbelievably crowded. And if you're going to try to take one lane away, you're going to have backups that'll probably extend to Virginia. Is anyone aware of this? Are you working with them? I mean, when you put the plan 9 years ago, there was no HOV plans on I-270. This is all new. So really, this master plan should have to really relook at what you're thinking of. I mean, I saw no mention of that these roads are going to be impassable.
Well, one of the next phases is so the way that we do these traffic analyses is we start with what's happening today. So we do a traffic analysis, we collect all of the existing conditions, and then we say, okay, what's coming if we do nothing in 20 years or whatever our horizon year is? What does the traffic look like then? And what are the conditions out there? And how do people get around? And then we say, what does it look like if in 20 years, all of the development that we assume that's been approved happens, and we analyze that traffic? So those are the next steps to take all of the assumptions and model them. That's what we do as part of our traffic analysis. So that's exactly what we do next.
Well,
So
Westlake,
go ahead. Yeah.
Westlake has to be widened if you're going to have it as an entrance to an HOV lane. And if you want to add bus lanes, I mean, I know Marriott is left, so there's plenty of vacant land by Marriott. You can easily widen the road there, and but you're starting to run out of ways of going. I mean, I don't think anyone's looking at, and the HOV is planned. This is not a major possibility.
Jerry, we'll run out of room if everybody keeps riding in their car by themselves, right? But that's part of why we're looking at what are the alternatives and what does that look like. That's exactly what we're studying.
Well, self-driving vehicles are probably going to be here within the next 10 years, which weren't thought of in 2013. I mean, the whole world has changed, and I know we have a plan for BRTs. And if you want the data on the ridership on WMATA, I'd be glad to furnish it to you. I have different sources that provide me with data on every single station and the number of people getting in at different times. I'd be glad to send it to the team because I probably have better sources than the team has.
We'd be happy to get the data, make sure we have the latest data. And Silvana's hand is now down. Okay, so I think we've covered, so we do have a representative from planning, but does not know any more than I do about Sears. So as we learn about particulars of the development, and perhaps at a future one of these meetings, we can invite one of the local planners to share just a little bit more about some of the development piece, because I know there are lots of questions and it may be helpful for folks to understand kind of the vision for what's coming out here. So we can think about that. Okay, Melissa, did we cover?
I do think we covered most everything. Thanks everybody for your time and your thoughtful discussion. This was very helpful. We're gonna continue to try to make sure we address all the angles of these questions, because if you don't ask them, the public's going to ask them, and it's why we're coming to you with this information before we go anywhere else with it. So thanks again.
So as we move forward, one question that we had was about folks' availability to meet over the summer, particularly in August. I know that lots of people have different vacation schedules, and I hope everybody has a wonderful summer and has wonderful plans. But given that we are in a virtual, we have opportunities to meet. If you can just let us know, and we don't have to open it up, but if you can just let us know if August is even a possibility. Otherwise, we will cross it off our list, but we thought we would ask so that we could kind of keep keep a regular schedule with the community. So offline, in my follow-up email, I will ask that question again, if you can let us know if that would work for you or would not work for you. And we will keep working over the next couple of months, and we hope that you'll help us get the word out about all of the engagement that we're doing in June, and we hope that we'll see some of you at some of those meetings as well. So thank you very much. We appreciate everybody's time and thoughtful comments, and we look forward to seeing you again at one of the upcoming meetings. So have a good night, everyone.
Thanks all.
Thanks.
Yes, the meetings will be, the recording will be posted, and thank you for reminding me.